and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai, an American living in Japan for 20 years. I've gone through some massive life changes and crises in my 20 years here. At its bleakest, I felt very isolated, alone, and helpless in the face of what was happening. I relied on alcohol and cigarettes to get through it the best I knew how, which worked until it didn't, and everything fell apart. I made it through with a little help from my friends, a fledgling mindfulness practice, and learning how to become my own strongest ally. I quit drinking and smoking, worked my way through my grief, found ways to forgive, created new connections, and started a regular exercise, meditation, and self-care routine. I've also become a national board certified health and wellness coach along the way, and developed a desire and passion to help others on their own personal journeys. This podcast is all about change, growth, healing yourself, learning how to get back up after life kicks you down, and exploring mindfulness and self-compassion as incredible tools available to each and every one of us to do just that. Hello, and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai. And today I will be talking about one of my favorite subjects. Once again, I am going to be talking about self-compassion. And in today's episode, I am primarily going to be talking about the tender side of self-compassion. In the next episode, I will be discussing the fierce side of it. So there's kind of these two parts that are like a yin and yang of the overall tool or framework of self-compassion. So today I will be primarily focusing on that softer, tender side. And I will be talking about the three elements that compose self-compassion and also how it continues to inform and benefit and educate me as I go deeper and deeper down my own path and into my own journey. I've been thick in the muck or the weeds of self-discovery and kind of journeying ever inward in recent weeks and months. But first, what I actually wanted to start with today was talking about and hopefully dispelling some of the most common myths about self-compassion, because it's easy for me as someone who is totally really into this hook, line, and sinker. I've read the books, I took the class, I practice all the practices. I really have felt the long-lasting effects and benefits of embracing self-compassion. It is easy for me to forget that there are people out there that don't know about it, don't understand it. I think a lot of people's starting point is just being open to the fact that it might actually be a better way of being and a better way of being in relationship with ourselves, which then translates to the people that we are closest to in our lives and our communities and the greater world. Because self-compassion is something that I think we might have our own personal understandings of. And for a lot of people, the first thing that comes up is some kind of resistance. So first of all, a lot of people think that self-compassion is going to make them soft or weak, or they're just going to lay around and feel sorry for themselves. And several other kind of myths that I'm going to go through kind of systematically at the beginning here. So first of all, this idea that self-compassion is going to just allow you to feel sorry for yourself or be self-indulgent. The research has actually shown that while self-pity and this feeling of why me is one way that people can respond to difficult situations in their lives, that is not what self-compassion is. With self-compassion, instead of just feeling like the victim and throwing our hands up in this kind of self-pity way, we actually are able to see how we are in the exact same situation as so many other people throughout the world. The element of common humanity connects us to others throughout the world so that we don't feel like, poor me, why is this only happening to me? In the same line, this thought that if I'm self-compassionate, or if I give myself compassion when I make mistakes or I do something wrong, it's going to let myself off the hook. But in fact, we see through the research and the studies that have been done on people that are more self-compassionate than not, we actually are able to see in a bigger perspective, more mindful way when we do make mistakes and what the damage actually is. So we're able to take responsibility and make repair for when we do make mistakes. And when we need to make amends, we're able to do that much, much easier than people that are not as self-compassionate. They might try to push away or ignore or suppress the feelings or the actions that result from how they deal with difficult situations or when they make mistakes. Another big resistance is this idea that self-compassion is going to undermine your motivation, like it's going to allow you to just be lazy and lay around and, Netflix and binge ice cream or something. But again, the opposite is true. When we truly care about ourselves and we are compassionate, we are much more likely to think of, again, the bigger picture and look beyond the in the moment self-indulgent behavior like Netflix and binge. Sometimes that might be appropriate and that's okay. It's not like we never do comforting or soothing things for ourselves, but we can recognize what is actually good for us in a bigger picture kind of a way. So this gets into the kind of self-indulgent myth as well. We're not just letting ourselves off the hook. We're not letting ourselves just lay around and be lazy. If we really care about ourselves, we do what we need to do to truly care for ourselves. So self-compassionate people are actually much more likely to exercise, to go to the doctor regularly, to have healthier eating habits. Another big one is this idea that self-compassion is selfish. And this is something that's kind of ingrained into our culture, especially I think in the West, in cultures that have been heavily influenced by monotheistic Judeo-Christian religions, this idea that if we think about ourselves, that pride is sinful or being selfish is just not a culturally prized characteristic. However, and this is something that I'd like to talk about a little bit today, compassion is not a zero-sum game. So just because we are offering ourselves compassion and we're learning how to take better care of ourselves and support ourselves, that doesn't mean that all of the compassion resources have been wasted inward. Compassion really is something that is cultivated and grows bigger and deeper both directions. As I learn how to become more self-compassionate and to understand these different parts of myself, it definitely enables me to look outward and to be way more compassionate than I think I was before. If you think about feeling down or experiencing any of the more difficult or negative emotions that we all go through from time to time, when we're in that spot, we tend to forget that it is something that we all go through from time to time. We tend to feel very, very isolated. And so it actually kind of cuts us off from any kind of compassion for ourselves inward or compassion for others outward, because we're just stuck in our own little mind and our own little world. So I hope that discussion helps to poke holes in maybe some of the resistance that you may or may not have around self-compassion. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you are somewhat open to it, but maybe you haven't really thought about it in a deep way or thought about how it might actually apply to you, because of these myths or these little walls of resistance that might have popped up. But the research basically shows that the opposite is the truth in all of these different myths. Self-compassion actually makes us much more engaged with the world, much more empathetic and compassionate for others. It also motivates us and it encourages us to find ways to take the best care of ourselves that we can, because we want ourselves to be happy. We don't want to suffer. We want to find ways to make ourselves as healthy and happy and experience overall well-being in general. So I'd like to briefly talk about the 3 elements of self-compassion for anyone that might not be familiar with them, and the 3 basic elements that underpin the entire framework of thinking about self-compassion is, number 1, the self-kindness versus self-judgment. And this can be one of the stickiest points, because so many of us do have some kind of inner judge or critic, whether that's harsh, whether it's a small, quieter voice. But most of us, when we do something wrong, our instinctual reaction is to criticize ourselves or judge ourselves or make ourselves feel worse for messing up. It's kind of like this knee-jerk reaction of, I made a mistake at work and I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? Or I should have known better. We instantly kind of attack ourselves. And so the idea is, with self-compassion, instead of giving into that tendency, we learn to see how we all make mistakes and it's not the end of the world. And what we really need in those moments where we fail or we make a mistake is to offer ourselves kindness and compassion. If you think about every teacher and coach or parent or different mentors throughout your life, just take a moment and think about the ones that were the best. Who is the most supportive, favorite teacher or sports coach throughout your life? And think about what made them your favorite, what made them stick out in your mind. I know for me personally, it's someone that I felt like truly saw me for me as a person, and she was very supportive and encouraging, and she also pushed me. She challenged me to challenge myself. She knew that I was capable of just a little bit more than what I was showing. And so those are all really positive qualities that, if we can cultivate and create them in our own selves, for ourselves, think how amazing that is, to have your own little inner kind of angel on your shoulder, supporting you, encouraging you, and again, pushing you to be a little bit better version of yourself. It's not a coddling, self-indulgent, or self-pitying frame of mind. We know that we are capable of great things. And so we want to try and encourage ourselves and find ways to push ourselves to do that. And if you take the opposite and you think about teachers that were less than stellar, or coaches or mentors throughout your life, think about how they were or how they treated people. It's those stereotypical army drill sergeant barking orders or humiliating or otherwise trying to break people's will, basically, to break them down into doing, somehow forcing them into performing the way that they want them to perform. How well does that work? How well did that work with you? But that is what we tend to do with ourselves. And it's for lots of different reasons. There's lots of different brain science and there's lots of different research and all of that. For today, I would like to just remind us all that our brains want us to survive. They do not necessarily want us to be happy. So there is lots of biological reasons that we tend to look towards the negative and we tend to criticize ourselves and we judge ourselves because we're trying to, in a DNA evolutionary way, keep ourselves safe. But that is not actually helpful and beneficial or productive way to do so anymore, but it's the way that we have evolved. So it's important to keep in mind now that we are intelligent enough to recognize and realize all of these scientific facts about the way that our brain has evolved and everything. We can use that now as a tool to say, yes, this is what my brain tends to do. And so that is why I am going to learn how to counteract that and try to offer myself kindness and care and encouragement and support the same way that we would to a good friend in similar circumstances. If our friend was going through, say, a difficult divorce, would we berate them and say, well, why did you do that? And why didn't you do that? It's your fault that this, that, and the other happened. That would be just terrible, right? That's like kicking someone when they're down. But that's what a lot of us tend to do when we ourselves are in that situation. We start to think of all the what ifs and we start to blame ourselves and we see all of our faults. So we want to try and learn to offer ourselves kindness instead of judgment in those moments. The second element of self-compassion is common humanity. I touched upon it earlier, but it is this idea that we are not alone. We feel so isolated. We can feel so alone when we are having the most difficult, hardest moments in our lives. And I know that that is something that I absolutely felt and experienced. And in retrospect, I wish that I would have found ways to try and connect or reach out maybe with other people a little bit more. But again, I was going through a really, really hard time, and I think I was just in survival mode. This is the thing. When I was going through a really hard time, when I was experiencing a lot of strong emotions and grief and dealing with loss and feeling alone and single parenting and all of those things, how many other people have also experienced every single one of them? And it's a way of reminding ourselves that we actually are connected, even in our moments of pain and even in our darkest nights. There are other people that do know how we feel. We all experience things in an individual, personalized way, but we're not the only person on the planet that's going through these difficult moments. That's just part of the human condition. And the third part of self-compassion is the mindfulness versus over-identification. That basically means that we are able to take a bit bigger step back, have a little bit more space, a little bit of perspective to see what's happening and to not get completely subsumed or overwhelmed or tangled up in all of the complicated, difficult emotions that are happening. I think all of us are very familiar with that feeling of just being stuck in the muck. And we tend to, well, I tend to overthink and kind of almost ruminate on what's happening. It's like you get a record in your mind going over and over the same things, and it's not helping. It's not creating new insight. It's not creating any space. It's just this loop of panic and worry and wondering what I did wrong or what I could have done differently. That's what we do. But if we're able to have a bit of space and have a little bit of mindfulness around it, we might be able to step back and say, okay, I feel really crappy right now. I am completely overwhelmed. I'm ruminating. I'm overthinking. Just even simply by naming what we're experiencing, we're creating that little bit of space, and we are cultivating that mindfulness of what's actually happening. And so that we're not so tangled up, or we're not drowning in the quicksand of what that process is. We're a little bit separated from it. The other side of that, and this is where my own personal journey has been taking me lately, is also being mindful of what is actually happening, and that it may be very painful and it may be very difficult, and recognizing that that is what's happening instead of resisting or pushing away or trying to suppress it in any of the number of ways that we tend to do as humans. I've talked about this several other places, several other times, but I can see so clearly how so many of the avoiding, numbing, distracting, disassociating behaviors that we humans engage in are coping mechanisms for trying to deal with painful emotions or difficult moments, or all of the stresses and tragedies that we experience as humans. Pick your vice or pick your 2 or 3, but it can manifest in things like eating and drinking and shopping and gambling, sex, overwork, all of the kind of addictive behaviors that can quickly spiral out of control. Even if they don't spiral out of control, even if they don't get away from you, I think all of us find these different ways to try and cope. Often it begins when we are very, very small. And so it's a survival mechanism. It's a way that we're trying to just protect ourselves and keep ourselves feeling safe in a world that is overwhelming and confusing. But once we identify that behavior as a way to make us feel better because we numb out the difficult emotions and we're able to suppress it or push it away, that just starts to reinforce itself. And we continue to further deepen that neural pathway and further deepen that groove in our brains and in our lives by reaching for that same mechanism every time we don't feel good. And then that leads, of course, to lots of other problems in our lives down the road. So if we learn from a young age that sweets make us feel better, then we wind up as a 50-year-old overweight and pre-diabetic and with all of these health issues, because that is our coping mechanism. That's just what we know how to do to deal with stress and to deal with the overwhelming, difficult emotions that are out there in the world that we all experience. What I am realizing on a deeply personal level and on a professional level, in all of these ways, self-compassion is a fundamental piece of changing that behavior and of being able to even look at your own personal patterns and to start to see maybe not even necessarily all of the whys and hows and where to's or what exactly started it originally. That's some deep, deep personal inner work that we absolutely can do if we want to, and we are ready and able to do so with a trusted therapist or coach or counselor, or in various groups that are designed for just such work. alone is not usually a very advisable way to try and dig into our past traumas or histories. However, using self-compassion as the base and the cushion to say, okay, I don't feel good in my life, or I don't feel good about the way that I am dealing with X, Y, or Z, or I want something to change. We need to have that bubble or cushion or soft base of self-compassion as a lens in order to make any true lasting changes. Again, if we think about coaches or teachers or mentors or caregivers in our past, the ones that made us feel awful about ourselves just created a deeper rut, just created another reason, another way that we reinforced the negative behavior that we didn't want to engage in the first place. So again, using the example of maybe binge eating or overeating or having off-limit foods like certain sweets or something, if we feel guilty and ashamed and terrible that we are doing that in the first place, that's just going to create more shame. And then we're going to just do that behavior again and again and again and more and more and more. It doesn't help break the cycle. But if we're able to look at it in a self-compassionate lens and with kindness and understanding and empathy, that was something that we did because it helped us at a certain point or a certain time in our life, but it's no longer serving us now, then we can start to think about what needs to change and what we need to do in order to break free from that habit or from that pattern. And I realize the more that I go down my own path, that self-compassion has been simply invaluable in trying to understand why I have done the things that I have done in my past and being able to change those things and to change the way that I feel. It's quite literally life-changing to start to think about, what can I do to make myself feel better? What small steps can I take to put myself on a more healthy, happy, all-around, balanced life's trajectory? The sustaining power and motivation behind that is because I have very intentionally been cultivating self-compassion. I'm motivated to continue to feel better and better. How I feel now, loving myself and giving myself self-compassion and being honest with myself about who I am, what I'm doing, what I have done in the past, I think is such a huge part of remaining motivated and inspired and forward looking and forward moving. I have this coach inside me every morning wishing, may I be happy, may I be safe from harm, both inner and outer. And I'm realizing that it's the inner harm that usually is the most tricky to deal with in life, right? May I live with ease, and may I feel loved. I whisper these phrases to myself every single morning, and I really believe it, and I've learned to really embrace it and embody it. And in so doing, I have also cracked open my heart in so many ways, and I can feel how much more compassionate I am towards others, towards all of us suffering beings. And it really inspires and motivates me to find ways to help other people also start to understand parts of this process, to understand how they can feel better and lead healthier, happier lives and get more aligned with who they really are and who they really want to be. So if anything, it hasn't simply improved my life or formed the basis for the kind of mental and physical transformation that I have undergone in the past decade or so, but it's really opened up the entire world and all of the connections that are out there that I am seeking to cultivate and create and maintain. And it doesn't feel selfish at all if I look at that in that kind of global perspective. How amazing would this world be if every single one of us felt truly loved and supported and protected and safe and encouraged and knew that we could do whatever we put our minds to? It would be a vastly different place. I do believe that we can start to work on that and start to put that into practice one by one, individually, each of us looking within ourselves and starting to change that inner critic and that inner judge that's always being really harsh and negative and yelling at ourselves, and learning how to start offering ourselves kindness and care and support and encouragement. So for today's takeaway, I mentioned the loving kindness phrases that I offer to myself and to all beings every morning at the end of my meditation session. May I be happy. May I be safe from both inner and outer harm. May I live with ease. And may I feel loved. Those are 4 phrases that I have chosen and kind of developed for myself. And then after I offer them to myself, I offer them to all living beings. So know that you have a little burst of love coming from me every morning. But for today's takeaway, I will encourage you to think about what phrases you would like to hear every morning whispered into your ear or your heart. And if you are curious, courageous, and brave enough to find a time that you can offer them to yourself each day, bonus points. So your takeaway is to first think of 3 or 4 things that you would like to hear every day and just offer to yourself in almost like a kind of daily affirmation way. And 2, find a time of the day in which to do so. I would love to hear how it goes. I would love to hear if you have any feedback or any questions or comments or thoughts about today's episode. I'm always very open to receiving feedback. You can send me a DM or send me an email. All of my contact information is in the show notes. If you are at all curious about working on your own self-compassion or changing the bad, negative, unhealthy habits that really have you feeling lethargic, down, and just like crap, I'm always very happy to talk on a discovery call. or I'm also accepting clients at the moment. So reach out if you want to connect and talk more about self-compassion, unhealthy habits, or anything else related in this personal development world. Until next time, thank you so much for listening and take care.